Hi, Jesse. Welcome to AppWright's OSS Fund.
Hey Alex, good to be here.
So this we're going to chat all about just kind of how maintaining open source goes, and you're actually one of our people that we funded. So it's really exciting to be able to help support you in any way possible, and we also want to get the message out. So this is kind of all part of that, but we also are really interested in hearing like your version of having to be a maintainer of OSS
Mm,
projects because we all know how challenging that can be. Um, Before we dive into it too far, though, for those who don't know you, do you mind just kind of doing a little introduction and who you are?
sure. So I'm like what's the right angle to go from here? I'll start with like where do I work? So I'm
Yeah.
currently a senior software engineer at a company called MoxieWorks, that's based in Seattle, but I'm here in Melbourne in Australian time. Um, I've been with that company for 5 years now, actually. Um, and it was at that company or at the company that was acquired by that company, previously called ActivePipe, where I was first introduced to the craziness of I guess the craziness of Git is the right way to put it. I was using Git at a previous company, but it was just so basic. There was like three of us there. It was like a true startup where you'd push semi regularly, but it was nothing really. I might have been pushing to the master branch directly. I can't recall, but
Yeah.
we didn't use pull requests. But then in this company, you were constantly switching between branches because it's like you're working on a feature. Oh, I need to go and fix a bug, and so I found the process of using the command line there super annoying, and so that inspired me to go and write the my I guess most famous OS creation, which is Lazygit, which is just a terminal UI that wraps around Git. And so that was in 2018 maybe. So I've been maintaining it ever since and trying to make it better. Um,
Was
so
was the first company that you got into, was that kind of like your first foray into development at a company as a whole? Or were you developing like using SVN or something prior to that?
so my first company was using Git, but it was just super basic, and it
Sure.
was once I got to my I say current company, but there was an acquisition in there, so it's kind of expanded over time. At my current company was when it was still using Git, but it was just doing things properly. Using GitHub and like you can use Git in a really rudimentary way if you're just pushing to master
Yeah.
constantly. That's all there is to it. So I've never used Subversion or anything like that.
So for the Git side of this, did you end up using that tool kind of locally for that project for a long time, or did you always know that you wanted to like open source it?
So that was from the beginning. It was just going to be open source. So it was technically closed source while I made it because I was scared about someone, you know, seeing it and I don't know, writing it off or copying it. I can't recall what kind of weird paranoia I had at the beginning, but it was effectively open source. Like I got it like MVP and then just made it public and then posted it on like a bunch of different places. Um, but the intention was to make it open source pretty much from the get go. And I suppose there's a few reasons for that. One of them is it's just really hard to get people to use a product like Git, which is running your terminal that is closed source. Because
Sure.
the question is like, well, why? Like, why would that need to be closed source? They'd want to know if it's trying to make outbound network requests and weird
Mhm.
things like that, because people are very precious about their terminal environments. But then also, like, there's a few other benefits. Like, you can rely on other people if something's open source. So you think about it, it's a developer tool, so it's made for developers, as I'm sure AppWright is familiar with.
Yeah.
You have a bunch of developers who are smart and know how to program and things like that. Who better to fix some bugs or add some new features than other developers who are users of the tool? So that's one of the big reasons. And then I guess the third reason was just, if I did a good job at the actual coding part of it, it would be nice to have that there and say, hey, look at me, I'm good at writing code. Um, Unfortunately, I don't know if I've yet reached a point where I'm really satisfied with the structure of the code. It's still a bit of a mess in some places. So
You're like every dev that's ever lived,
yeah, just
That's
this
the same, right?
constant sense of the kind of shame in the background, like,
Yeah.
oh man,
You're like, I
that's
need to push forward. We need features. We need all this stuff. And then it's like, but there's this like lagging technical debt that we have to deal with, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, which is super embarrassing because I don't even have like deadlines. I just kind of make up my own deadlines based on motivation levels.
Sure, sure.
Um, so,
So
but
so
yeah,
like we kind of buried it a little bit, but so Lazygit is the product we're talking about. I'm gonna bring it up and just like in your own kind of your own pitch, your own terms, however you want to say it. Can you just break it down a little bit for us? So
yeah.
here. So
Um,
I'm rocking iTerm here. I'm just
nice.
gonna call the Lazygit command. This happens to be just a repo that I have. And this is kind of the core of it, right? Like your idea is to like anything you commit and things like that, instead of trying to remember constantly all the git commands, like this is it. So sorry, you break it down and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So, um, I suppose that like the first thing that I wanted to get good at, no, not the first thing I wanted to get good at. So the first thing I saw was that TIG already existed, which was it's kind of like the incumbent Git terminal UI, but it's kind of focused on just doing stuff with the commit log. So it opens up in the commit log, and you can do things there. There is a section for staging and unstaging files. I didn't really like the way it went about it, so. Many people will just use Lazygit purely for just staging files and making a commit, and that's all they do. So if you have some modified files, you'll see them show up in the files panel, and then you can press space on it to stage it, and then you press C and you can make a commit. For the typical things that you need to do on a day-to-day basis, it's like one key press basically. So the goal is just make it as fast as possible to do things. It does support the mouse, but it's mostly just intended to be used via the keyboard.
Okay.
So that is kind of the bread and butter is just trying to make the things you typically do very easy. But you can see in the bottom right, there's this command log. That was actually a kind of recently created thing. You can see the text is truncated just because it's the wrapping isn't very smart. But the purpose of that is if you were to, well, I was getting kind of, I had a survey that I put in my repo that said, what do you like about Lazygit? What don't you like? What are the issues you're having? And one of the things people said was like, I don't really know what command's running when I do things. And it makes me a bit concerned because on the command line, I know exactly what's happening because I'm the one doing it. But in this terminal UI, that's not the case. So the command log is there so that when you actually do something, it will basically tell you what's happening.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
so it's
Cool.
like,
If I want to like check out this branch or
yeah,
something, it would
you
actually
can
go up
press.
there.
Yeah, so if you click on, say, the dev branch and you press space, that'll, yeah, so it says git checkout dev.
Oh yeah,
Um,
nice.
so, and so one of the arguments against using a GUI for these things is like, well, what if you forget the command line commands? Which I find is a crazy argument because, like, you can it takes 10 seconds to Google them anyway. So I don't
Right,
know why
right.
it's a big problem.
Yeah.
But yes, so that is one of the benefits is that if you are a bit paranoid that you might forget how to use Git, or you want to learn more about what's happening when you want to do something, so say like cherry picking or something like that, you can see what's actually happening there. And if for whatever reason down the line your hand is forced and you have to do something on the command line, you have a bit more of an idea about what is happening there. I know there are lots of people who are using Vim or NeoVim and using basically like a plugin to just switch to Lazygit and then switch back to keep doing things. So with VS Code, I've been trying even just having it in the integrated terminal
Yep.
and switching. And I got some friends who do that as well. But it is the case that there is value in having something that's like properly integrated with an IDE, and that's something that Lazygit doesn't really have going for it right now. Like it's kind of got it through plugins with Vim, but
Yeah, I really love that Vim argument. That totally makes sense to me, especially if you like remote into a machine and that's all you're using or something.
Yeah, definitely. So, but it's something I'd like to improve. Like I'd like to sit down and spend some more time thinking through a much better Vim integration. But I know some people have been come from the other angle where they say, well, I'll use VS Code for the basic stuff like adding files and things like that, but I'll come to Lazygit when it comes to some crazy rebasing I have to do, which is not necessarily as easy in something like VS Code.
Yep. I totally get that. I use a visual tool for that as well in VS Code, so that makes sense as well. That's really neat. So I think you kind of touched on like why open source made sense to you, and like kind of both from like studying your code, examining it, and things like that. As far as like keeping up with the maintenance of Lazygit, from an app right perspective, and what I've seen, especially going through Hacktoberfest, this can be daunting. For a project like yours, are you maintaining that yourself? Like, what does the day in the life of Lazygit maintainer mean for you?
That's a good question. It's changed over time, that's for sure. So early days, it was just well, early days I was lucky because when I eventually got traction with it and got attention, it was just kind of like a heap of people were starting to use it, and then a heap of people were telling me everything that was wrong with it, and so I was. And then, but I had some contributors early on who kind of got on board and had lots of skills and could help me understand the ins and outs of different things. Just because there's just all this stuff that you don't even know you don't know. Like just even different testing patterns and ways to handle the CI stuff, and getting it released and making it installable. So in the early days, it was just a lot of me kind of spending insane hours each day trying to keep on top of everything and making sure that it's not so broken that people decide it's not worth using. And that was a lot of me depending on those contributors. Over time, it's changed where I mean, I suppose maybe after an initial stint, because it's been a few years now, so there was a long period where it was just like I would go through different phases. I'd go through a phase of like I'm going to tackle a bunch of bugs, so I go to the issues board, look at some bugs, what's kind of what's like easy to fix, and then what's something that people really want to fix, and try and find a good balance between those two things, and try and kind of cut down the bugs board. But then I'd also kind of get a lot of it's like managing motivation. So I was like, okay, this is killing me. These, fixing these bugs. I'm going to switch over to doing more feature work. So I'd pick some big feature and I'd spend like, a couple of weeks just doing that after working on the weekend. Sometimes I would take time off work. In fact, most of my leave that I take from work, I'm just purely using a Lazygit. So I come back being like, oh, I'm exhausted.
You need to take a break.
Yeah, I'm trying to get better at managing my time that way. But where I'm currently at now is in an interesting situation where I'm not spending as much time making writing big features like I used to. I'm spending a bit more time trying to encourage other contributors to help me out, basically, because there's a lot of people who actually have interest in contributing to Lazygit, and so it's just a matter of kind of making it really, really easy for them. So if somebody raises an issue and I know like, oh, that sounds pretty easy, I'll go and look at the code and see where are the places I have to change, what's the rough outline of what can happen, put that in the actual issue as a comment, and then just put like a good first issue label on it. In Hacktoberfest, it was like the Hacktoberfest label. It's like basically the same thing. So I've been trying to do more of that and trying to focus more on the architectural side of things and more of the I revamped the integration test system because I wanted to just have a heap of integration tests. And so I'm doing more of the things on the peripherals, and less so stuff like direct features and bug fixes. But I'm still lucky to have some like regular contributors. Yeah, so MJark and Darwid6 were very early on, like hugely helping out. And then Ryuga and Mark 2185 are more recent contributors, but they're just amazing. They're like putting up PRs on like on a daily basis almost.
And of course, Appright is a current sponsor of yours, and that's why we're excited to like be able to support open source. I just wanted to call it.
I'm hugely appreciative of.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear it. Hopefully, it gives you a little more time, or like you can take those days off without stressing as much.
Yeah.
So yeah, like this is your sponsorship page, but I just wanted to call out the fact like you do have a lot of sponsors out there, but not enough to like support this thing full time, I don't think.
No, not even close. Which is really sad to say because it actually is quite a lot of sponsors compared to the typical open source project. But that's unfortunately just how it is. It's hard to
that's exactly what I wanted to bring up. Like open source, even when you're super successful, it's still like you're working because you like it. Like at the end of the day, unless you're like massive projects, otherwise you're just not making it. So I love kind of bringing up people and like maintainers that can check this stuff out. One of the questions we had outside of like GitHub sponsorship, do you have any intention to try to monetize Lazygit or one of your other projects like Lazy Docker or any of the lazy somethings that you're working on?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would love if that, I suppose, I guess I can respond with an example I've seen in the wild. So I know Git, I think it's called Git Fork, is a tool that I think was open source, but at least I saw it in some random GitHub issue. There was someone made an issue saying, this is worth paying for, let me pay for it. And saying, please put a price tag on this because we want to be able to reward you and the effort you're putting in. And so looking at that, I was thinking that if I can make Lazygit good enough that people are pushing me to say, put a price tag on this thing because it's silly making this free, then at that point, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
But not before.
Couple different shout outs just before I let you go. We have this YouTube video is amazing. It's 15 Lazygit features under 15 minutes. Highly recommend. Just if you're even slightly interested, go check this out. It shows the full power of Lazygit and what it offers. So it's a really cool video that Jesse put together. Second thing, make sure you can go to github.com/Jesse Duffield. That's where you can check out all of what Jesse's got going on. Tons of different packages out here or repos out here that you can check out. And Twitter, I assume, is probably right up there.
I don't post a whole lot, but I want to start posting more stuff because I have various things on my hand that I think are funny that I want to just get out in the world, but I don't just because for no good reason. But yes, that is the official Twitter where I will sometimes post about making new releases of Lazygit and LazyDocker.
So we're at Duffield Jesse on that one. So definitely check out everything that Jesse's got going on. It's really impressive. I really appreciate your time kind of breaking down OSS and like what you're doing with it. It's amazing. So thanks so much, Jesse. Appreciate it.
No worries. It's been a pleasure, Alex.
All right. Take care.